Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Joe here. Joe, you were involved in Wilson and led Wilson as CEO for many years, and you were able to take it from a company that was known to, I think, just an incredibly different level, bring in some of the best athletes in the world, produce some of the highest quality athletic equipment there is, and really cement the brand into a space that it has an incredible amount of respect. So I'm excited to have you here, talk about how you're giving back to younger people, younger generation, and talk about your journey as well.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it, and I'm excited to be here. It's an honor to talk to you. And yeah, Wilson, it was founded in 1914, and we like to say that we've been empowering athletes for over a century. And our vision is to create a better world through sport. And that sounds like a lot, but we typically say it's four things that sports do, and they make the world a better place. Is first, they add fun and joy to our lives, and then secondly, they help us with our mental and our physical well-being. And then a big thing they do is they create belonging, and they create a sense of community. And we always say it doesn't matter if you're a team member on a team, or if you're a fan of a team, or someone like me who's raised two kids. I felt like I've made almost all my adult friends, on the sidelines watching my kids play sports. So it creates that sense of community. But most important, what sports do is they create life skills, and they teach kids how to work hard, how to learn new skills, how to win, fail, that resilience that can transcend beyond sports into their life, and create great lives. So, and I've been there 30 years, so I have a really deep understanding of the company. It's
Wow,
been an exciting journey, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with you.
amazing. So, just your foundation, like, were you always into athletics? Were you somebody who was into just different sports? And did you have a passion for business leadership when you were younger? How did this area become something that you want to spend so much time of your life in?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I did grow up in an era where maybe sports were less organized and structured, and we played a lot of pickup games. We always joked that, we drove our bikes down to the baseball fields during baseball season and played football, in the park when it was time to, play football during the football season. But we certainly played organized sports. Mine was football more than anything. And then, my passion in general is endurance sports, which is outside of Wilson. And I do play a lot of golf. Unfortunately, I'm still trying to improve. That game gives me a massive headache. But from a business perspective, I was fortunate in high school. Our high school offered 3 years of accounting, so it gave me a
Wow.
foundation in business and accounting, and that's what I ended up going to college for. I went to Purdue and double majored in accounting and finance.
Mhm. Did you feel like Purdue was essential to your foundation as a business leader? Like, was it that so important that you went there?
Oh, for sure. And, I think, as I tell anyone, I think all schools are good. It's what you make of it as a student. And certainly, even when I worked at Wilson, I could say that I knew who the A players were walking around the company, but I couldn't tell you where they went to school. So I think, it's an important foundation, but it is what you do with it beyond the
Right.
education.
So, what was your first like foray into the business world? Like, what was your first role?
So do you mean just in general or within
General,
Wilson?
yeah, in
Yeah, in
general.
general, I did typically what most accounting people do is when I graduated from college, I started in public accounting.
Mm,
I was pretty confident that that wasn't going to be something that I was going to do forever. And it was always a place where they told us, you should go for 2 or 3 years and get that foundation. And if I would have liked it, I would have stayed. But it was one of those things where it was fast paced. It was a good foundation of learning, and I always knew that I wanted to go into a business and a brand, and work in business and hopefully be a CFO one day. That was my goal.
CFO. So it was a bit different of a goal.
Yeah,
Yeah. So accounting was a passion of yours, or was it just something that you kind of fell into because of what happened in high school?
I would say, I kind of fell into it from high school, but I was always good with numbers and math, and enjoyed
Mhm.
numbers. But I always remember people always saying that, accounting was the language of business. And that's the way I always looked at it. And I would say, maybe growing into the business side, I was fortunate to learn that it wasn't always about just working with numbers, but it was also being a business partner to the people that were running and leading um, businesses. And I was lucky that I worked in a culture at Wilson Sporting Goods that I felt like accounting and finance was always kind of on the front line in the trenches. We weren't the back office, talent in the organization. So it gave me an opportunity to learn a lot more beyond, just accounting and finance.
So, what was your first role with Wilson? How did you even get involved in Wilson in general?
Yeah, that's probably a story that'll never happen again. I don't think for kids. So I was, just a couple of years, like I said, out of college, probably 25 years old, and my mom happened to be reading the newspaper on a Sunday afternoon, having a cup of coffee, and she saw an ad for an entry level accountant in the classified ads for Wilson in Chicago, and she just circled it and left a note and said, "I thought this might be something you'd be interested. You should apply for it." And I did, and I got the opportunity. What I'll say, which I never expected and planned for, and when I talk to younger people today, um, I call it, it's learn over earn early in your career. That's the line I use. And one of the things I did do, this was in 1995. I didn't do my due diligence when I went to Wilson to work, and I just expected, I knew the brand. It was, a big company, and it turned out that it wasn't doing very well and was struggling. We were losing money at the time, and the company had to do, within the first 12 months that I was there, did a major change in the leadership team, but
Mm,
also did a big restructuring and downsizing in the organization to reduce the cost of the company. And if I recall, I think it was about one third of the employees were reduced at that time period. And if you can imagine, they always need to protect as much as possible the revenue generators, the product teams, and marketing. And when you're in the back office, the accounting area gets trimmed a little bit faster. So it was a significant reduction in the accounting and finance. But what it offered me early in my career then was that we were really lean, and there was a lot of work to go around as long as you were willing to take it on, work hard, and you had that positive attitude. And some people left the company because they were concerned, and some didn't embrace it as much as I would, as they needed to, because they would do the typical, hey, there's the same amount of work but fewer people and they expect us to do this. But I was young and I didn't know anything, and I wanted to learn, and I wanted to get growth and responsibilities. And those first 4 years I went from staff accountant to senior financial analyst, and then all the way to a corporate controller. And by about year 4, around that time, I was already the manager of global financial reporting and analysis, which was a huge step. And I don't think that would have ever happened in a more mature, kind of stable environment.
so they just had to pull you up because it was just so much going on at the company. Like they just needed, like having you internally was just easier.
Yeah, it was just, I think it was just easier, and I kept proving myself every time. I'd take more on and more on, and I was successful, and I made my leaders successful. That was always my goal, and it just worked out. So I always, and again, like I said, I call that, it's learning over earning, because it was very
Mm.
early in my career, and I just was, keep giving me whatever you can, I can handle it. And I've talked to other people, who were presidents at other companies, and I hear similar stories earlier in their career where they've worked at places that were a little unstable, and they said that the company couldn't pay or attract the talent, so it really opened the door for them with less experience to jump in there and do
Huh.
things that they normally would not have. Um,
Mm.
One of the things that even happened during that time period, where it was right around that fourth year of starting with Wilson, sometime around like 1998 or 99, a huge company merged where their headquarters was in West Virginia, I think, and then also in Green Bay, and they moved their headquarters to Chicago for the new merged company. And they were a $7 billion company with 30,000 employees, so completely different than Wilson, much more significant. And a lot of employees didn't relocate to Chicago from those two places, so there were a lot of finance positions open and available, and you didn't even go in and interview for a job based on a position. It was more based on they just learned about you and then tried to match your skills up with where all the openings they had. And I did do that at that time. And um, they did come back to me and they offered me a job. What was interesting is the pay was double
Huh.
what I was making at Wilson, but and I was excited about that. But then the role they offered me was a very narrow role that
Mm.
was called like accounting manager for the 401k plan, and I was like, that sounds kind of like a dead end job. It sounds kind of very narrow. And I already do that at Wilson as I think at the time I was the corporate controller, and I said it's less than like 1 or 2% of my job. I don't understand how
Mm.
that can be a full time job. And they were just explaining, well, we're a big company. It's a big, a lot of, money and expenses coming through those lines, and you'll have 4 or 5 people reporting to you. And luckily, I chose at that time not to chase the money, and I decided to stay at Wilson because I felt like I was getting, the broader experience and exposure to things that would help me more long term
Yeah.
than what that company would have offered.
How many employees was it at the time, Joe, when you just joined to that kind of growth period?
Uh, in Wilson at that time, I bet you we were probably, maybe about 1,000 employees. I bet if I had to guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And what happened from that? Like, you got more accounting responsibilities, but was there a shift, like kind of a small shift happening where you were doing other stuff besides accounting? Like, when did that occur?
So what happened was, and which I could have never predicted this, and I've heard this one, you probably heard it a lot too on podcasts, where I think Steve Jobs is the first one who ever said it. He said, you can never connect the dots going forward. You can only hope that they add up to the future. Or if you look backwards, I think it was somebody recently like Matthew McConaughey said that it's like science when you look backwards and connect them. One of the things that I did do in 1999, and it was a bold move, and my wife at the time had an opportunity for her job, and she called it her dream job,
Mm.
and we had to relocate to Orlando, Florida, for this opportunity. So I ended up putting my resignation in at Wilson in
Really?
1999. I did, but I was happy and I was doing well. But this was a great opportunity for her. And in the near term, I didn't see like maybe the next steps. I saw the acceleration quickly, but I thought that maybe it was going to kind of cap out and people weren't leaving their, the turnover was pretty low with the people who did stay there. And what ended up happening is I said, listen, I'm leaving on good terms and I'll give you a 6 month notice. And what that'll do it'll allow you to get through it was getting towards the end of the year. So it allowed us to get through the budget. It allowed us to get through the year end close and then also through the audit. And then I said that it'll give you an opportunity to hire somebody, and then I'll be around, for the 6 months to help transition the role. And they took me up on it, and it ended up being a great 6 months. But during that 6 months, some projects came up that were overseas. And Wilson's a very global company because if you think about tennis, like most tennis is played outside the United States, and also golf at that time.
Mm.
Was a really big business for us, and I'd say like half the golf business was outside the United States too. So we had a big international business at that time, and the CFO offered me project role after the 6 months and said, "Listen, I can't promise you anything, but if you're willing to travel, I'm fine with you, working from home in Orlando, Florida, but then I need you to be on a plane 2 weeks out of every month." And traveling around and working on these. They were more financial related projects, but I can only promise 90 days. And, so for me, I was sitting again, it was another one of those learning things where I thought, okay, well, I don't have a job. I didn't even really start looking at the time during that 6 month transition a little bit, but I thought to myself, I'm only going to, have a stronger kind of experience and background if I do international experience, regardless if it's 90 days and that's it. So I took him up on it, and it turned out that it lasted 2.5 years. And even in that time period, there was a moment that we had to have interim finance leader in our Wilson Japan subsidiary. So I ended up taking that role on for about during that time period for about 18 months. So I literally would fly to Tokyo for a week once a month, and then I would go somewhere else for a week, and then come back home for 2 weeks and do it all over again for a year and
Huh.
a half. And that was a great learning experience too, because it was really the first time that I was like a finance leadership role in a business subsidiary.
I mean, when you were at the company at that point, did you understand why the company gravitated towards tennis and golf specifically? Like, because there's other companies that were competing in those areas. Like, what was Wilson doing so well that gave it such a competitive edge in tennis and golf?
Yeah, it's what we do all the time, and we do it now. We were just really strong in tennis and golf at that time. We've since built our team sports business, which is really baseball, football, basketball for us, the same way, and it's probably a bigger piece of the business today. But
Hmm.
there's really three things that we always do at Wilson, and I do think it's the reason why we've been able to create a leadership position and equipment across more sports than any other brand. I mean, if you think about it, there's tennis companies are pretty much just tennis companies, and baseball
Mhm.
companies are baseball companies, and so on. So, but there's three things that we always do, and we always say that we're grounded in sports. So we're set up as a sport-led business. We have teams that you either work in baseball, you work in golf, or you work in tennis, and we're structured that way.
Mm.
So, because we never want to be a generalist, we want to be really close to those consumers in those sports. We say if a tennis player ever thinks of Wilson as a company that makes tennis stuff versus a tennis company, that's when we're going to get in trouble. So we're very strategic and intentional about that. The other thing is, and it's our products. We have a foundation innovation. We go back 12 decades of iconic products in the marketplace, and our products have to perform. They have to be the best in the market. We even innovate where people think you can't. Like we have, decommoditized what a basketball is, and also, an American football. And then the last thing we do is it's all about design. And if you look at our products, they're just beautiful. We call it creating objects of desire. So you
Mm.
want those three things. You really have to be in the sport and be a specialist, is what we call it. We have to continue to innovate and make great products, and we have to make them beautiful. That's really how you win, and that's how Wilson's been able to do that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Those are incredible pillars, and clearly the foundation for a great brand. Um, so, just kind of going back to your story, when we were talking about it. So you had this position that started shifting a little bit your responsibility. How long did it take to go to like a C-level position from that point?
It it seemed like a long time, but looking back, it was really short because I started in 1995, and I took the CFO role on with Wilson in 2005. So it was 10
Wow.
years, which is pretty fast.
Yeah.
And I would say the the 4 to 5 years I worked in the team sports division, and a big step that happened was after I did that international role and was the interim finance leader for Wilson Japan.
Mhm.
My dream job came up, which was a divisional finance leader in our team sports division, which I mentioned that's the baseball, football, basketball. And my wife, I convinced her to move back to Chicago.
Mhm.
And the craziest thing that happened, and this is one of the things I tell people when I talk to them too, is to that like growth and opportunities in my experience has been disguised as change. It's just not something that's simple and it's out there. And what happened is when I moved back to Chicago and I took this divisional financial leader role, and one thing that was significant about that was I reported directly to the general manager of the division.
Mhm.
And that was the first finance position that I didn't report directly to a finance person. So I was responsible for the finance function and reporting into a general manager. And I was only on the job for about 2 to 3 months. And at that time, we were very operated autonomous and end to end business. We had everything inside our divisions. We were even on it's crazy to even think about this, but we were even on separate IT platforms by division, which that would never happen today. But I was in the job for like 2 to 3 months, and the senior team at the Wilson level made a decision that they were going to set up service centers and for the accounting and finance functions. And when I came in, I had 22 people reporting to me. And
Mm.
after they told me that decision, I was only going to have about 2 people reporting to me. But what ended up happening, as you can imagine, so that's big change. And I moved back. I thought to myself, how could they do this to me? I just took this
Mm.
job. They had to know that this was coming. And the reality of what happened was they put in the service center all of those kind of basic functions like closing the books, collecting the receivables, paying the bills.
Mm.
And what that allowed me to do though was take those things off my plate that I already knew. And then it forced me, with the capacity that was open, to work with, we called them business directors at the time, and they ran categories like product categories in football and basketball and baseball and so on. And what I ended up being was the finance partner for those business directors, which then got me closer to the business, and I was able to learn the business. And I would have never saw that if I would have,
Yeah.
somebody would have given me a choice. And it was just one of these things that came out through change, that the other side of it was better. And fortunately, I accepted it and didn't resist the change, fully. I won't admit that it was an easy curve. I had to go over the change curve, but it was something that I could have never predicted. And we did really well during that time period. We ended up tripling the sales of our division at that time, and we became the most profitable division, which we were the least profitable
Really?
starting that 5-year period. And what ended up happening was the general manager of that division ended up getting promoted to be the CEO, president of all Wilson. And because of the success, and there was a transition. And one of the first decisions he made was, we built a lot of trust together. We worked well together. He made me his CFO pretty quickly. I think it was within the first week that he took the job. So that's how I ended up getting to there. And again, you could never predict that, right? Like I
Yeah.
could have never thought, you know what, you need to resign so your wife can take this job in Florida. And then you know what, you're going to come back to Chicago and take this division job. And then they're going to strip you of all the responsibilities you think you have. And
Wild.
it just opened the door for opportunity. And again, that's where I always say to embrace that change, because the other path of resistance usually doesn't work out. And I think on the other side, when you do accept it and you embrace the change, there's always growth and opportunity that come out of that, and positives. It's
Mm.
so far in my cases, it's always been positive from that perspective.
What was it like being CFO after 10 years of being at the company? And, how was that experience? Did you feel like you understood the business well enough? Did you feel like you were ready for the position? And what was it like?
I I would say, as anyone, I think, who takes on a new position, and a big one, I don't think any of us always feel ready, and you're a little nervous about it. But I don't think we'll ever feel ready, and you just got to jump in and put one foot
Yeah.
in front of the other, and get into it, and all the learning is in the doing. Um, it it was a big jump. I had a lot of confidence in the team that I was around, and I think that helped a lot. I I had good finance people working for me in my function, but also I had a great leader at Wilson as a president. That we were a great team, and he was a great leader. And then just all the functional leaders at the company. So it made that transition a bit easier. And I do think that's one of the things is, as you think about young people, or you don't even have to be young,
Yeah.
anyone in the company. I think to be successful, it's really important who you surround yourself with. And
Mm.
I think it's the behaviors are contagious too. So whatever you give or whatever you receive from them, those are going to be contagious. So you want that positive energy. But I think the thing that a lot of people miss, and I always say, to surround yourself too with people who complement your skills.
Mhm.
And I think when I was younger, and coming up in an organization, I thought you had to know everything and be perfect at everything. And it's not true. There's just some people who have different skills. And as an example, I'm somebody who likes to go in a room and whiteboard and try to solve problems and think strategically. But I need that person who's in the operations who likes to bring it to life and is excited about, the execution of it and getting Gantt charts and timelines and, goals and there, I get energy from one and the other person gets energy from the other one. So I think you need people who have these
Yeah.
complementary skills so you can be successful.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Um, you people kind of overlook that. It's mostly you surround yourself with people that are different, but you really need a core team that gets you, understands you, and can implement anything. And that's
Yeah.
people that are
And I've
complementary.
seen in my experience too that it takes, some humbleness and you got to kind of like make sure that you don't have that ego that's too big, that you think you have to show up and you have to know everything and be right on everything, and be able to do everything. And
Yeah.
it's funny, I had a conversation with somebody earlier today and they were asking me about my leadership style and I said, I'm more of a coach than anything. And I always looked at it as I said when I was coming up in the company, I always used to look at the leaders, the president of the company, and say, "Wow, I don't know how they got there, and they're so smart. They know everything." And this, and then when I ended up getting there, what I realized was there's 2,000 people about at the company now. I'm like, I'm only one person. I need those 2,000 people, to be excited to work here. I need them to be capable, and I need to empower them for us to be successful. So
Yeah.
it's really important that you have that
Mhm.
diversity and skills and opinions and talent. And
Mhm. What did you do, Joe, when you became CEO, and how did the opportunity for you to become CEO happen?
yeah, so how it happened was the president that was in the seat, he had been there about 7 years. We did some great things together. We did two acquisitions together. We bought Louisville Slugger. Wilson owns Louisville
Right.
Slugger. We also bought
Remember that.
Evo Shield at that time. And so we built this really strong baseball portfolio. But he was at core a tennis person, and
Mhm.
his dream job opened up to be the president and CEO of the USTA, which runs also the US Open tennis tournament in New York City. So he left for that role, and him and I worked really well together. And I would say one thing that during my time period when I was the CFO and he was the president, he didn't really set boundaries on what I could get involved in. And it turned out that I ended up working closer with our general managers more. And they would almost say you're kind of the COO, not just the
Yeah.
CFO. And I think that time frame of working with them directly with him also gave me that opportunity to kind of grow and be ready during the time period. But he recommended me as the next president when he left the company, and they did put me in as the interim. This is sometimes a controversial thing, but it's also another learning thing. And what was interesting was it was in they put me in as the interim president before they officially made it permanent, but it also was 7 months, so it was a long time frame. And
Yeah.
I'll say there was a couple things that were interesting. Was number one, there were a few people who said you should never take an interim role because if they
Really.
pass you up, you need to explain why you might have gotten passed up. And I didn't see it that way. I saw that even if I didn't get it,
Mhm.
and then that went to my thing over the 7 months. I just kept checking the box, like, okay, I made 30 days, now I made 60 days,
Yeah.
90, and then 6 months. And I thought, okay, so at some point I'm going to be sitting in here long enough that it's going to qualify me. If I don't get this role anyways, I'll be able to, search outside the company to
Mhm.
find a president role. And at worst, what would happen is it would make me a better CFO, right? Like, what better would it be for a CFO to sit in a CEO seat for 6 to 7 months
Mhm.
and then go back to being a CFO? I think that would have made me a better CFO. But fortunately for me, it worked out, and I ended up getting the role, and I stayed in it for 6 years.
What would you say that you're most proud of when you're in that role? Like what accomplishments, Joe?
We did a lot, and it's going to sound like a long list, but I would say the one thing I'm going to go with several things, so I won't say the one thing, but I'd say if, first of all, we created a really good culture, and we started doing engagement surveys almost quarterly,
Mhm.
and the the benchmarks, we were best in class, and we were in the top 25% for consumer goods companies in our culture engagement scores. I was really proud of that. And at the same time I took the role on, we hired a new chief people and culture officer. So he brought in a lot of expertise. And then, with my ability to be with the company for, almost 30 years at that time, to be able to get the buy-in and get the transformation in the company, it was a huge success. The other thing we did during that time period is in our football and basketball business, we did sign a long term partnership with the NBA and the WNBA. That was a big, big deal. It's made us the number one basketballs company in the world. And we've always been the dominant share in American footballs. We've been the NFL football, since 1941. We say that the Wilson brand is the only ball that scored a point in the NFL since 1941. It's one of the longest standing partnerships in sports. But we had a factory that was built in about 1941 also. And in 2024, we just opened a brand new factory in Ada, Ohio, where we handcraft all our leather footballs. I'm really proud of that. And, a couple other things is we did reach, it was a big milestone in 2022. We reached 1 billion in sales for the first time in the history of the company, and
Wow.
since 1914. And I'll have to admit, I was a little scared when we crossed that milestone. I'm like, I don't want to go backwards and go below it, but we've grown every year since then too. So it never went backwards, and that was a big milestone. And then one of the things that we did, you probably see it. It's one of the big things moving the brand today. I think it's the biggest opportunity for Wilson. Is we've been the number one tennis equipment company for a long time.
Yeah.
And what we recently did in 2021, we expanded into apparel,
Mm.
and it's premium apparel, and we've also expanded into retail sales. So we've been opening stores in the United States, in China, and then also in
Been in them.
Southeast. Yeah, and it's been great for the brand. It's great for our tennis brand. And equipment markets are they're not as large as, let's say, the footwear and apparel markets. So it just opens a whole new runway of long-term growth opportunities for the Wilson brand and to be more relevant in everyday use. So it's a big opportunity.
Yeah. Joe, what are you doing now? Why did you decide to kind of step back?
You know, 30 years was a long time, and being the CFO for 15 years and the CEO for 6 years, I chased a lot of quarters of trying to make numbers, and you know it I love the brand and I love the people, but it was just time to take a break and try to think about what I might want to do next. And that's one of the challenges I'm having right now, is to try to figure out what I might want to do. But what I have been doing in the meantime is I love, giving back to young people. This started with our internship program. I would spend an hour with the interns every year at the kickoff of our summer intern program. And I've turned that now into where I've been visiting high schools, and I've also been to some colleges. Most recently, I did the University of Wisconsin, and I'm heading to Purdue later this month. And I have a presentation that is basically the 8 lessons that I learned over those 30 years that I wished I would have known when I was in my 20s. And I tell stories behind those
Well,
lessons from my personal experiences. And it seems to be going really well. The kids really enjoy it. And you can tell by the engagement and the questions after. I always do a Q&A, and you can tell by the quality of the questions that it's really connecting with them. I feel like there's a void maybe right now, and they're hungry for that type of information and leadership to give them confidence and really what to expect. And I think it helps for me because I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I'm a first generation college graduate. So
wow.
um, that is one thing, but also, and I do qualify this with them. I think they connect with it because they understand Wilson and they understand the products, so they can relate to that. Um, and then the 30-year journey from being entry level to CEO. There's just a lot of lessons there. But the one thing that I do tell them right at the beginning too is that just because I stayed somewhere for 30 years doesn't mean that that's the right choice. And I do believe there's value in moving around. I always enjoyed the employees who came into Wilson from somewhere else and brought different perspectives in. And some of our favorite employees at Wilson, we call them boomerang employees. We have a lot of them. They leave and they work somewhere else for a while and then they come back. And we only hire back the really good ones. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, Joe, that was all the questions that I had. I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I think it's amazing that you've had this incredible journey. You were resilient for a long time, stayed with something that you loved, and now you're giving back that knowledge and you're going around and telling younger people a lot of insights into how they can build something great and be a part of something great. And I think that's so important. And there's definitely a lot that a younger generation is going to learn from what you just talked about here. And I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. And I'm excited to see what's going to come next for you.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Ben.